There's a version of your life you keep waiting to arrive. Maybe it starts when you finally get the promotion. Maybe it starts when someone finally sees your worth. Maybe it starts when the fear finally goes away on its own. You've been standing at the edge of your own life for years, waiting for permission, waiting for rescue, waiting for the right moment to finally show up and hand you the life you actually want. Here's the question that should terrify you a little. What if nothing is coming? What if no one is coming? What if the version of you that finally acts was never going to be rescued and was only ever going to be built? Most people never let themselves sit with that question long enough to feel its full weight. Because if it's true, it means every excuse you've been quietly relying on, bad timing, bad luck, other people, an unfair world, starts to collapse. And underneath those excuses is something far heavier than disappointment. It's responsibility. Total, unshared, uncomfortable responsibility for the life you're currently living. This is not a comfortable place to start a video, and it's not meant to be, because the truth we're about to explore doesn't offer rescue either. It offers something harder and ultimately far more valuable. Look closely at how many people actually live. Not the version they present online, but the quiet version, the one that exists at 11 at night when the distractions run out. So many people are waiting for their circumstances to change before they change their behavior, waiting for confidence to arrive before they take the risk that would build it, waiting for someone else, a partner, a boss, a parent, an algorithm, to finally validate what they already suspect about their own potential, waiting for the fear to disappear before they do the thing that only fear can teach them how to do. This waiting feels passive, even harmless. It doesn't feel like a decision, but it is one. It's a decision to hand your life over to conditions outside your control and to quietly hope those conditions eventually rearrange themselves in your favor. And the tragedy is that most people don't even realize they've made this decision. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens gradually through 1,000 small avoidances until one day a person looks up and doesn't recognize the shape their life has taken. Modern life is almost perfectly designed to encourage this kind of waiting. We are surrounded by systems that reward passivity disguised as patience. Algorithms tell us what to want. Institutions tell us what success looks like. Social approval tells us what's acceptable to say, to become, to pursue. It is entirely possible now to move through years of your life on a kind of psychological autopilot, absorbing expectations instead of examining them, reacting instead of choosing. And underneath that autopilot is often a quiet, unspoken hope that if you just follow the expected script closely enough, someone, somewhere will eventually validate that you did it right. This is exactly the condition Friedrich Nietzsche spent his life diagnosing, decades before modern psychology gave it clinical names. Nietzsche wrote at a time when the traditional structures that once gave people meaning, religious authority, inherited moral certainty, a fixed sense of one's place in the world, were beginning to crumble across European society. He didn't mourn this collapse the way many of his contemporaries did. Instead, he saw it as an opening and also a danger. Without those old external structures telling people what to value and how to live, human beings were suddenly faced with an uncomfortable freedom. They would either have to build their own values and take responsibility for their own existence, or they would quietly drift, letting mass opinion and social convenience make those decisions for them by default. Nietzsche had a name for people who chose the second path without ever realizing they were choosing anything at all. He called it herd morality, not because those people were unintelligent, but because they had outsourced the most important task of human life, the task of defining what matters to the crowd around them. They lived reactively. They shaped their identity around avoiding disapproval rather than pursuing anything they had actually examined and chosen for themselves. Against this, Nietzsche placed an idea that still unsettles people today: He believed a meaningful life requires you to become, in a very real sense, the author of your own existence. Not someone who discovers a pre-written purpose waiting to be found, but someone who creates values, direction, and meaning through the deliberate exercise of their own will. This is where his concept of the will to power becomes essential, and it's worth being precise here because the phrase is often misunderstood. Nietzsche wasn't describing domination over other people. He was describing an internal force, the drive to grow, to overcome resistance, to expand one's own capabilities, to shape oneself rather than be shaped entirely by external circumstance. This is where the deeper, more disturbing layer of the idea reveals itself. If meaning has to be created rather than discovered, and if no external authority is coming to hand you a finished identity, then waiting isn't a neutral position. Waiting is a form of self-abandonment. Every day spent hoping that circumstances will change before you do is a day spent treating yourself as a passenger in your own life rather than its author. And here's the part most people never let themselves fully understand. The reason waiting feels so much safer than acting isn't because it's actually safer. It's because acting exposes you to the possibility of failure that you cannot blame on anyone else. As long as you're waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right circumstances, any failure that eventually happens can be attributed to those external factors. But the moment you take full responsibility, the moment you say, "This is my choice, my risk, my life," failure becomes personal. It becomes information about you. And that terrifies people far more than the discomfort of staying stuck. This is the real function of approval seeking if you look closely enough. When you shape your decisions around what others will think, you are quietly trying to distribute the risk of being wrong. If everyone agreed it was the right decision, and it fails anyway, somehow it feels less like your failure. This is an old, deeply human defense mechanism. And it's also, according to Nietzsche, one of the most reliable ways to guarantee a small, unexamined, ultimately unsatisfying life. Ask yourself, honestly, where this shows up in your own life. Where are you seeking permission you don't actually need? Where have you confused the opinions of people you don't even respect with some kind of objective verdict on your worth? Where are you still waiting for conditions to improve before you allow yourself to begin the thing you actually want to build? These questions matter because the alternative Nietzsche describes isn't comfortable, but it is honest. He believed that a person only becomes fully themselves, what he sometimes described using the image of the Übermensch or Overman, a figure who creates his own values rather than inheriting them, through a continual process of self-overcoming. This isn't a single dramatic transformation. It's a repeated, often unglamorous discipline of confronting your own weaknesses, your own excuses, your own comfortable illusions, and choosing again and again to act anyway. This is where the central transformation of this entire idea becomes clear. You have likely been treating responsibility as a burden, something to be avoided or delayed for as long as possible. But responsibility, understood correctly, is not a punishment. It's the only real doorway to power over your own life. The moment you stop waiting for rescue is the exact moment you stop being a bystander to your own existence. So what does this actually look like practically outside of philosophy? It looks like making decisions based on values you have personally examined and chosen, rather than values you inherited by default from your environment. It looks like taking the action available to you today, even in imperfect conditions, instead of waiting for conditions that may never arrive. It looks like separating the discomfort of disapproval from the question of whether a decision is actually right for your life. It means learning to treat failure not as evidence of your limitations, but as information you needed in order to adjust and continue. It means recognizing that confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It's usually the result of it. You do not wait to feel ready. Readiness, in most cases, is manufactured through the act of beginning, not before it. It means auditing your life honestly for every place you've been quietly waiting and asking what would change if you accepted right now that no one is coming to grant you permission and no one ever was. Return to that image from the beginning, the version of your life you keep waiting to arrive. Understand now what that waiting actually costs. Every day spent hoping for external rescue is a day spent absent from your own life, present in body but not in authorship. The uncomfortable freedom Nietzsche described over a century ago has not gone away. It has only become easier to avoid, buried under distraction and the comforting illusion that someone, somewhere, is still coming to tell you who to become. No one is coming. Not because the world is cruel, but because this particular task was never meant to be handed to you. It was only ever meant to be built deliberately, one honest choice at a time, by the only person who was ever qualified to do it. You.